Yesterday, 21-year-old Roy was kicked out of the prestigious Columbia University, and that's because Roy has been a very bad boy. He used the power of JavaScript to make an application that can help you ace your technical interview, no matter how unprepared, nervous, or just plain dumb you might be. You see, Roy's app is not like other technical interview prep products out there. It's an invisible and undetectable AI that automatically guides you through technical interview questions as they happen in real time on a video call. And it actually works. Roy used his own tool to get real offers from big companies, including Meta, TikTok, Capital One, and Amazon. He then made a video explaining how he did this, and that brought great shame on these companies. The offers were quickly rescinded, and Amazon desperately tried to scrub the internet of the video where Roy showed the entire process from start to finish. They also tattled on him to Columbia, and now he's officially kicked out.
In a recent earnings call earlier this year, Sundar Pichai, CEO of Alphabet and Google, announced that YouTube's annual revenue had surpassed more than $60 billion across ads and subscriptions, while the platform itself now has over 325 million paid subscriptions. Also throughout 2025, YCombinator, a VC firm, invested in around 630 startup companies. What do these two stats from these two different companies have to do with each other? Well, the answer to that is pretty simple. YouTube started off all the way back in 2005 as a 3-person startup launched by former PayPal employees. Less than 2 years later, Google would go on to purchase YouTube in 2006, paying around $1.7 billion at the time. Aside from YouTube, 2005 also gave us YCombinator, a startup accelerator and venture capital firm which runs a program that startups can apply for, and if you make it to the final stage, your startup could walk out the door with as much as $500,000 of seed funding to get your own tech company up and running. With $500,000 of funding in the bank, safe to say a lot of aspiring CS graduates and founders in the tech industry would gladly try living the YouTube dream of launching a company and later selling it for billions, then walking away with enough money to retire. The problem with all this, though, which seems to be coming up more and more frequently lately, is that instead of the startup dream becoming an optional path you could pursue, more and more people are now starting to feel pressured into becoming founders and CEOs, or maybe joining a startup, for one pretty simple reason, that being tech companies are laying more people off and CS graduates are currently struggling to find entry-level tech jobs. The path of getting a CS degree, then going on to join an established company, getting promoted to some form of management, and earning enough money to retire after a 40-year career is becoming much more difficult to chase for new graduates who now find themselves competing for entry-level jobs against experienced candidates who recently got laid off from their senior-level positions. In this new world, how do you become a senior-level software engineer if no company will hire you when you're fresh out of college? How do you become a senior-level database admin or cybersecurity specialist if companies hire less and less people for those junior-level positions? Instead of doing something about the broken hiring system, the tech industry looked at all those questions, looked at the job market, then looked back at all the fresh graduates coming in and said, well, just start your own company, mate. The phrase, if no one is currently hiring, just go out and become a founder, is becoming the new tech industry version of just going to more networking events or contributing to open source. As the tech job market becomes more oversaturated, a resume filled with internship experience and a few solid projects is no longer enough to get your foot in the door. The practice of now applying to 1,000 jobs just to land 2 interviews where both companies will go on to turn you down because someone with more experience than you showed up in the next batch of candidates is starting to become more and more normal. New graduates are getting crushed by the entry-level job market, yet every time you hop online or read the news, another startup just had a $1 billion IPO, and someone on YouTube is telling you about how their project just went viral and they've launched a startup from their bedroom which is making $10,000 a month. It starts to seem as though the new signal in the tech industry is becoming, nobody's going to hire you unless you build something that goes viral. Which unfortunately brings me back to the point I brought up earlier, that being, not everybody wants to be a founder or join a startup. Most graduates, like myself, just wanted to join an existing company and make enough money to pay rent and maybe eventually be promoted to a senior level position, which as you all know has always been a pretty normal career path. But in this current age, it's starting to feel more and more as though the tech industry and the job market as a whole is shaming new graduates or shaming people who just got laid off for feeling that way. When you find yourself unemployed, the questions now turn into, if you don't have any ideas for your own startup, why did you even bother getting a CS degree? Or, if a company just laid you off, why aren't you building your own side projects? Or maybe the classic, if you're constantly applying for jobs and struggling to land interviews, why aren't you on YouTube or TikTok, quote unquote, building in public? Once again, it starts to feel as though nobody's going to hire you unless you go viral. The problem with all this advice is that it intentionally ignores the negative aspects that come attached to it. When I brought up YouTube at the start of this piece, there's something I intentionally did not tell you. You see, those same three guys who started YouTube, they weren't exactly broke. When PayPal got acquired by eBay in 2002, many of the early stage employees cashed out their stock options, which is a fancy way of saying YouTube's founders could afford to build YouTube without having to worry too much about needing an immediate source of income. They had enough funds to get off the ground, and also, since they had industry connections, YouTube also went on to receive further funding from venture capital firms such as Sequoia Capital. When Google would come in and buy the company, the three founders would go on to get their share of a life-changing $650 million. That last part is usually what most CS graduates such as myself hear about. The classic billion-dollar exit where everyone got to cash out millions and go home. When the tech industry tells you to launch your own startup, they conveniently leave out the part where you'll probably need some form of funding to build something that's even sustainable enough to make a living. Even solo developed projects come with a cost. If you're running a website, you need to pay for hosting or servers and also buy a domain. If your app has features that need an external API, you need money to pay for those too. The idea of simply, quote unquote, shoving a payment processor into your app and watching the money come rolling in is not really how things go in most cases. It also doesn't matter how cool your side project is if no one knows it exists, which means you also need some form of a marketing budget. Then there's also the issue of coming up with really good ideas for projects to build, especially if you're launching your own startup as part of a small team. How much revenue is your open source browser going to make in a world where Google Chrome runs almost 70% of the browser market share? Your project still needs to generate income so everyone on the team can make a living. And let's not forget, there's also the cost of acquiring users. If your startup has a bad launch, do you have enough funding to keep the lights on until things work out? If you don't have enough users to break even or make your money back, will you be able to absorb the remaining costs? Not everyone has the luxury of having a full-time job that can help you launch your startup and also absorb some of the early costs, especially if you just got laid off or you're someone who's still in college. And let's not forget, as I mentioned earlier, not everyone wants to join a startup or become a founder. All these questions I bring up wind us to a concept known as survivorship bias. We hear stories about all the startups which succeeded, but we conveniently leave out all the failed startups and the costs associated with trying to start a company when you're both broke and unemployed. If you can't get hired, even after sending out hundreds of job applications, and launching a startup is basically unaffordable, it just starts to feel as though the job market no longer needs you, and your only chance of getting noticed is to go out and build something else that goes viral, which also brings its own set of problems. The odds of you building something that does go viral, enough for you to drop out of college or even quit your current job and go full-time with your startup, are very low. You aren't the only one who's trying to build the next Facebook or Google. Millions of videos go live on YouTube daily. There are thousands of other talented engineers on the platform showcasing their own projects in hopes of landing that one viral video which can turn their own side project into a startup or maybe even land them some VC funding. Each of these videos is like a chip at a casino being put into a slot machine, hoping that next algorithm spin comes along to change somebody's life. The problem with slot machines though is that someone else is setting the odds. If your content doesn't do well, your online tech startup suddenly becomes yet one more in a pile of thousands that went out of business before anyone even heard about your app or service. And speaking of getting VC funding, when I mentioned YCombinator earlier, I also left out a second example of survivorship bias. Depending on the source you choose to cite, YCombinator can receive anywhere from 20 to 40,000 applications each time the next round begins. Many of those applications will die out during the first stage, and only a few hundred even make it to the final round where they get a shot at being funded, meaning your odds of getting picked can be as low as 2%. Getting VC funding from one firm such as YCombinator can be enough to bring in more firms on board or even land you your own $1 million buyout. So that means there's a rush of people coming in hoping to get picked, and if the odds are already that low just for YC alone, how high are your odds of getting funded? Which brings us back to the point I raised earlier. What about all the other job seekers out there who don't want to go through all of that? If you just want a stable 9-to-5 job that pays your bills and you don't want to be a part of a startup, or you're not interested in quote-unquote building in public in hopes of going viral, where do you go in a tech industry that seems to be pushing away the regular person who just wants a normal job?